Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Back to Basics. Jason and Brenton in for the sixth episode, and we're going to be talking about dual position players. Brenton, I know you love these type of players, and why do you love them so much?
Because it gives you versatility in your squad where you might have injuries or multiple players from a certain team who are on a bye. You can kind of plug and play. As we know, you have to field that 13 in a position that they need to be in. So this dual position gives you a lot of flexibility to make sure that you've got the best 17 squad that you can possibly fit every week.
That's the one. Now, you will see in the rules, and I've got a little excerpt there around how auto emergencies work. We've spoken about it in a previous episode as to how it works. The main thing is, Brenton, that we want to focus on is those dual position players. If you have them on your bench, it means that if either of those two positions recorded do not play, you're good to go.
Exactly right, and this is why the squad depth is so important, and why if you can, if it's a tie break where you're trying to pick between two players, generally the dual position player will come out on top because it gives you that flexibility.
It certainly does. And another aspect as well of dual position players is there's only a certain amount of times a season that they are updated. Now, again, if you view the guidelines on the NRL Fantasy website, you'll see that there's 4 occasions where they are updated. So, after round 1, Teamless Tuesday, there are going to be 2 of them, which we'll explore in a subsequent episode. Round 7, round 14, and round 21, which means that these are the only 4 windows when a dual position player can receive a second position. Now, Brenton, we know that if a player is already dual position, they cannot be given a third position. And why is that?
Because that's just too crazy. It provides too much depth, and you have to make the game challenging in a way. So I think two is absolutely fine, considering there is only 6 positions.
That's right, because otherwise Connor Watson could probably have a case for having all of them. And Connor Watson is a player that we're actually going to talk about when we get to this next part here, and that is when are DPPs likely to be awarded to players? It's a question we get regularly throughout the season. Is this player going to get a dual position added at the next update? And when is that update going to be? Obviously, we've just gone through when those updates occur, but named in round one's usually a pretty obvious one. We know with Connor Watson at the moment in 2025, he's only named as a mid, and NRL Fantasy have more or less communicated to the population that if Connor Watson gets named hooker in round 1, he'll be given a dual.
That's right, and this is for the players who don't currently have the dual. As we said, you can only have 2 positions on NRL Fantasy. So this is for the people who have only got the one position. So as you said, Connor Watson right now is only a mid. So he's not a mid edge, he's not a mid center, nothing like that. So he has the eligibility to be a dual position player should he be named on the team list Tuesday for round 1 in a different position to what he actually is in the game.
That's right. Now, another thing that we do need to keep in mind with this is these are factors because we've seen in previous seasons, such as Elliot Whitehead, there was a season when he played 4 games at centre and didn't get dual position. So something that they do take into consideration is what they call tactical versus injury cover. So if a coach tactically puts a player in a second position, so for example, Connor Watson played a bit of hooker last year, looks like he's going to play it again this year, that might be considered a tactical choice. But Brenton, say if Mitchell Moses was out for 3 weeks at the start of the season and Bryce Cartwright then gets named in the halves round 1, it's unlikely that he's going to get that dual.
That's it. I think it just becomes a bit of a common sense thing for how they allocate the dual positions. There was a year where Dylan Brown played a couple of games at centre, and they were never going to give him the centre position because the coach was just trying something. It wasn't actually. It was basically an injury cover piece. So they just use a bit of common sense for what positions they are, and to make sure that you're not filling up your squad in the lower scoring positions with high scoring players.
Yes, that's right, because we call those OOPs or out of position players, where essentially, like you mentioned there, if we have Dylan Brown in our centres and he's going to average 50 plus, we're going to be absolutely cooking with gas. And probably leads into this third point here. If a player's named in the position 3 plus times, and what we mean by that is either named on the TLT or in the final hour cutoff, they might get it. And as we saw with players like Bo Fermor and Dylan Lucas last year, them actually getting named 3 times in that position was actually enough for them to be awarded the centre dual halfway through the season.
Exactly right. And this is where it can always be super helpful because as soon as you start learning through fantasy what positions score high and what positions score low, and you can then hopefully get those higher scoring players in those lower scoring positions.
That's right. And the last thing as well that you often see here is past history. They do lean into this a little bit when it comes to awarding dual players, and that's more so of a issue when it comes to that injury cover. If a player's played in that position previously, they're more likely to get that as a dual than if they have not. Dylan Brown being a great example. He hadn't played in the centres before he went in there when they had no centres there at Para, and that's as a result he did not get that. If he played in the centres, like say debuted in the centres and played a few games there, he'd be probably more likely to get that dual position player. But that wraps up this edition of Back to Basics. Brenton, what are the key takeaways?
Again, without reading just off the slides, but looking for those out of position players. So like your Beau Fermors, Dylan Lucas's, as centre is a very hard position to cover because it generally doesn't score well because they're not the try scorers. They might be setting up the tries, and they also don't have the run meters for coming back like the other outside backs do. So if you can get someone who has base stats like a middle forward, edge forward, or even a half, and you can buy them in the centres, that becomes an out of position player where you can probably get a little bit of a leg up on a lot of other coaches. Using the dual position as a tiebreaker. So an example this year could be, I don't know if I want Ruben Garrick or if I want Jareem Buller. It's probably a poor example, but the tiebreak, if you like both of those guys, well, Ruben Garrick has dual position. So therefore, you know that he can cover multiple positions if you need to, should there be injury or suspensions or anything like that. So you can use dual position as a tiebreak there. And you can also just adapt for your placement each week. Again, if they've got buys, if they've got concussions, whatever, you can always make sure you're fielding a full 17.
Absolutely, and we're going to start to talk about that in the next few episodes. But this wraps up the 6th episode in relation to dual position players. Thank you for joining. If you haven't already, subscribe on Talking League Shorts, and we'll join you in the 7th one when we talk about building our round one team. But it's bye for now.